1900, a guy named Charles Fox Parham opens a Bible school in Topeka, Kansas. So why is that significant that some college student, well, I guess he wasn't a college student anymore by that time, but a young man opened a Bible school in Topeka, Kansas. This was the gentleman who essentially was the first person in modern times to come up with the doctrine of glossolalia. If any of you come from a Pentecostal or holiness background, in English that's speaking in tongues. So he's really the first one that came up with that idea, so he can be considered one of the two fathers of the modern Pentecostal movement. 1901, speaking in tongues occurs at a holiness meeting in Topeka, Kansas. We often identify Los Angeles as the place where Pentecostalism was started, but notice all this activity in Kansas before the Los Angeles revival. 1903, a revival in Galena, Kansas gains thousands of converts to Charles Parham's message. So again, this is all Pentecostal stuff bubbling up to the surface. 1906, what many people consider to be the foundation of the Pentecostal movement, the Azusa Street Revival in Los Angeles, led by a pastor called William J. Seymour. And his first reading from the Bible, not surprisingly, was from Acts 2, which describes the Pentecost, and in time that becomes the name for the whole movement. 1908, the Methodist Episcopal Church adopts a social creed at its general conference. We've talked about how many of the mainline churches have become really focused on what we call the social gospel. That the key thing in the New Testament is that you should do unto others as you want them to do unto you. You can see how far back those roots go. 1908, the social creed. 1910, though, in kind of a counterbalance, the Presbyterian General Assembly publishes a evangelical, the 5-point deliverance, which is very focused on basic Calvinist principles. And by the way, being a Calvinist doesn't mean that we don't believe in taking care of other people. We just believe that the central message of the New Testament is salvation through Jesus Christ, and that once you are saved, then you do good works to people, rather than doing good works to people being what saves you or being the key message of Christianity. By 1913, there's 4 million Methodists in the country. 1914, the first General Council of the Assemblies of God is formed and receives women into fellowship. So 2 points to make there. The Pentecostal movement at this point is, 8 years old, and they're already starting a bureaucracy. So it seems to happen faster and faster that when new denominations or new churches are formed, that they become bureaucratized fairly quickly. Second thing, a lot of Pentecostal churches today do not allow female ministers, but notice when they were originally founded, they did. Let's see, North and South reunite in United Lutheran Church in 1918. If that sounds like it took a long time for the Lutheran Church to stop fighting the Civil War, think of the Presbyterian Church, which didn't do it until the 1980s. Let's see, post-World War I, Methodist Church strongly supports the temperance movement, and I have a section in here on the prohibition. We'll talk about quite a bit about it, but interestingly enough, the temperance movement, prohibition, was not a conservative movement, it was a liberal movement, and it was originally created because to end domestic violence, because by that time it was very clear that most domestic violence, the cause of it was alcohol. And so this was actually, what in those days would have been called a progressive movement, you know, William Jennings Bryan and all that stuff. January 29th, 1919, the 18th Amendment to the Constitution is ratified and prohibition starts. 1919, the thing that's nice about doing the timelines is you see all these different movements which are often somewhat conflicting, but you see their roots. 1919, the World Christian Fundamentals Association. One of my favorite people in the 19th or the 20th century Protestant movement, Amy Semple McPherson. becomes a national sensation as a Pentecostal revivalist. And I have a couple of slides on her, which we'll talk about. 1925, boy, here the lines are drawn. If they started to be drawn during the Civil War, they are put in concrete because of the Scopes monkey trial, which pits fundamentalists against social gospel in a spectacular and cataclysmic trial. 1926, Amy Semple McPherson is somewhat discredited in what may have been a phony kidnapping. So even back then, the people who were heads of mass Christian movements could be discredited. 1931, women are admitted to the role of a ruling elder in the Presbyterian Church. But there really weren't too many of them until like the 60s and 70s. But theoretically, you could be one as early as 1931. 1933, Prohibition is repealed. 1933, okay, now we're getting into what some of you have told me is the part of the course you're most interested in, which is the rise of the evangelical movement and Billy Graham. So now we're starting to see some signs of that happening. And some people would chart the rise of the evangelical movement to a Sunday school teacher called Henrietta Mears, who founded the Gospel Light Press that originally was focused on producing Sunday school curriculum. So 1933, the evangelical movement as we know it today begins. 1938, Methodist Episcopal Church, Northern Body, and Methodist Episcopal Church South reunite. So the Civil War is officially over in 1938 for the Methodist Church. 1939, 7.7 million Methodists exist after the unification.
Is that when the United Methodist Church?
No, that was a little later. The United Methodist Church is when the Evangelical Brethren and the Methodist Church came together, so that's a little later. 1941, fundamentalist Carl McIntyre founded the American Council of Christian Churches. Just out of curiosity, how many people in here have heard of Carl McIntyre? Just out of curiosity. In time, there would be a major split between him and Billy Graham. I think it was 57 or 58. We'll get to that. 1941 also, Young Life is founded by Jim Rayburn. Anybody in here in Young Life when they were in their younger years? We got a few hands, I was. This is also part of the evangelical movement, Henrietta Mears, Young Life, Harold John Okenga, we'll get to in a moment. It is also the beginning of what some people call the parachurch movement or the parachurch phenomenon. Because up until the Billy Graham crusades and the rise of evangelicalism, everything seemed to be focused on denominations. And Billy Graham really changed all that. So like Young Life, as an example, Young Life was not a Baptist ministry, it was not a Pentecostal ministry, it was not a Presbyterian ministry. It was a para-church ministry, which means it crossed denominations. So that was a key difference with what Billy Graham brought. 1942, although everyone in here, if I had asked you the question, oh, you can probably still see it on the front of my shirt. If I'd asked you the question, who founded the modern evangelical movement, you all would have said Billy Graham. But there was actually somebody before him named Harold John Okenga. And Harold John Okenga is the guy that heard Billy Graham preach a few times, and he said, "This is my guy." And he's really the one that launched Billy Graham. 1943, Pentecostal churches joined the National Association of Evangelists. The fledgling Youth for Christ movement attracts 70,000 people to Chicago's Soldiers Field or Memorial Day. This is really the start of the modern revival movement that Billy Graham would become famous for.